factoring. And we've already talked about factor when we did GCF. So what did I say a factor meant when I was talking about the greatest common factor? Okay, factor means multiply. So when I was referring to the greatest common factor, it is the number that multiplied into it. So factor means to write as multiplication. All we're doing when we factor something is we are writing something as multiplication. So we're basically working backwards. What we did on the test we just took yesterday, we were multiplying. Whether you were distributing or foiling or distributing multiple times, we were multiplying. Yeah, Brian? I can't find one. Just do it on a separate sheet of paper. If you find it, you can write it down. So what we're basically doing, when I say factor, I want you to write it as multiplications. We are working backwards. If you look at example A, B, and C, these are polynomials. This is how your final answers look like with what we did yesterday. If I said multiply like this is something in my head. You don't need to write this down. X squared plus 3x plus 1. This is what I gave you on the test yesterday, something like this. And it said multiply. So you distributed, added your exponents, blah, blah, blah. What we're doing is this is now going to be what my answer looks like. So we are working backwards. So instead of multiplying through, I'm working backwards to write it like this. Because that's what factor means, to write it as multiplication. So we are working backwards. So I'm thinking in my head, my final answer I should recognize as multiplication. I'm going to have parentheses. I'm going to have something times something. That is what my final answer, whenever I factor, is going to look like, to write as multiplication. So keep that in the back of your mind. First way of factoring, there's going to be 4 or 5 different ways of factoring. The first way you always check with factoring is factoring using the GCF, using the greatest common factor. And that's why we spent the past couple mornings on the warm-ups kind of going over what a GCF was. So as I look at part A, first of all, I notice this is not written as multiplication. This is 15w minus 3v. So if I want to factor, I want to write it as multiplication. So first thing you always check, whenever you are factoring, you always check to see, is there a GCF between these two terms? So as I look at 15w and negative 3v, what is the GCF between 15w and negative 3v? 3? Or I could also pull out a negative 3. It doesn't really matter what you pull out. I'm just going to pull out a 3. So I am pulling that out. So I'm going to put that in front of the parentheses. So your GCF, and I'll label this, so if you go back and look at it, your GCF goes out in front of the parentheses. Now, you are kind of reverse distributing. So you kind of have to think about distributing. What if I distribute this 3 through, what's going to give me back 15w minus 3v? There's a couple ways to think about it. So we're kind of reverse distributing. 3 times what will give me 15w? 3 times what will give me 15w? 5w. So let's just do the first part. So we're kind of reverse distributing. I took out the 3. The GCF was the 3. I didn't take out a w or v because they didn't have those in common. And then you kind of reverse distribute. 3 times what gives me 15w? 5w. 3 times what gives me negative 3v? Negative 1v, or just negative v. You don't really need the 1 in front. So we're kind of reverse distributing. So you can take your 3 and say 3 times what gives me 5w, 3 times what gives me negative. Now, is this factored?
Is this written as multiplication? 3 times 5w minus 4. That's how you tell if it is factored. It is written as multiplications. So we're working backwards. This right there is what you would have been given yesterday, and you would have gotten that as your answer. So we're working backwards, what we did yesterday. Okay, let's look at B. This is the first way you always want to check to factor. Do they have a GCF that I can factor out? So what is the GCF of 7u squared t squared? That's one term.
2ut squared, that's one term, and negative ut. So as I look at this, I want to know what is the GCF of 7u squared t squared, 2ut squared, and negative ut. So look at your coefficients. What are my three coefficients in those three terms? What are my three coefficients in those three terms? 7, 2, and negative 1. So my three coefficients are 7, 2, and negative 1. What is the biggest number that multiplies into 7, 2, and negative 1? 1. So you don't really have to put it out. There really isn't a GCF for my coefficient. Now I look at my variables. So I go through my variables and I start with u. Do they all at least have a u? Yes. So then I look and say, what is the lowest exponent on my u? 1. So I'm going to bring out a u to the first, or just a u. So we're looking for the GCF of all three of these terms, like we did on the warm-ups. Now I go through and I look at my t. Do all three terms have at least a t? Yes. And what is the lowest exponent on the t? 1. So it's going to be t to the first. So that is my GCF. So I'm going to put it out front of the parentheses. So GCF goes out front, in front of the parentheses. Because I want to factor. I want to write it as multiplication. So ut times what will give me what they gave me. So we're going to think about distributing. So, or here's another way to think about it if you want to. It doesn't really matter. I started with 7u squared t squared. If I take out a ut, what is left? Yes, something else. 7ut. So you can either think about, okay, if I started with 7u squared t squared, I didn't take out any numbers, so I still have a 7. I took out one of the u's, so that becomes a u left. And I took out a t, one of the t's, and it's t squared, so I have a t left. Or think about distributing it. 1 times what gives me 7? 7. U times what gives me u squared? U. T times what gives me t squared? T. So you can either think about like distributing it, what I need to multiply by, or if I'm taking it out. A couple of different ways you can think about this. Now the next term. I started with the 2. Did I take out any number, any coefficient? So I still have a 2 here. I took out the u, so do I have any u left in here? No, because I took it out front, so I don't have any u left. I started with t squared, and I took out a t to the first, so I'm going to have what left? T. And you can always think about distributing it. ut times 2t is 2ut squared. So you can always check it by distributing it. Now, ut times what will give me a negative ut? Negative 1. Make sure you put your negative 1 there. That's the place where I see mistakes. You have to have a negative 1. So when you distribute it, you get a negative ut back. If I would you can always check this by distributing it and see if you get back the original. Okay. Any questions on that? Last one, part C. Negative 4a squared b minus 8ab squared plus 2ab. So if it helps you to kind of mark off your three terms, those are the three terms I'm looking at. So you always, whenever you're factoring, you always try to look for the GCF first. So what is the GCF of negative 4? Let's look at my coefficients first. Negative 4, negative 8, and 2. What is the GCF of negative 4, negative 8, and 2? 2. Let's take out a negative 2. Doesn't really matter. We're going to take out a negative 2. I'm going to choose to take out a negative 2. So that's my coefficient part of my GCF. Now I look at my variables. Let's look at my a. Do they all have an a? Yes. What is the lowest exponent with the a as I go through my terms? A to the first. So I'm going to take out a to the first. So this is the GCF, just like we did on the warm-ups. And then I look at my b's. They all have at least a b. What is the lowest exponent? B to the first. So my GCF is negative 2ab. So that's no different than what we did on the warm-ups. Now the difference is when I have to figure out what's going to be left. So let's think about distributing. Negative 2 times what will give me a negative 4? Positive 2. So you can think about distributing it. So negative 2 times 2 gives me a negative 4. A times what will give me a squared? A, as I add the exponents. B times what will give me just a b? Nothing. So I already took out the b, so it's just 2a. The next one, negative 2 times what gives me a negative 8? 4. Positive or negative? Positive 4. I have ab squared. I took out the a, so do I have any a left? No. I had a b squared and took out the b, so how many b's do I have left? 1. And then the last term, you cannot forget the last term here. Negative 2ab times what gives me a positive 2ab? Negative 1. So do not forget you have to have a 1 there. So that when I distribute, you can always check this by distributing it. Negative 2ab times 2a, negative 4a squared b. Negative 2ab times positive 4b, negative 8ab squared. Negative 2ab times a negative 1 is a positive 2ab. Yes?
They all gonna have a negative 1 in?
Not necessarily. They only have a negative 1 because this was the same as what I took out. That makes sense? Not always necessarily. Let's go ahead, flip to the next page. Could you run these down the tab real quick?
I should make your pen.
Sorry, yeah, you got it. Okay, top of the next page. A couple harder ones. Thank you. Okay, so we are still going to factor out the GCF. These are just a little harder. So let's look at A. I notice I have 3 terms. This is a trinomial. Here's a term. Here's a term. Here's a term. You always look for the GCF first before you try to factor any other way. But since we haven't factored, we haven't learned the other ways, just the GCF for today. Okay, let's look at my coefficients. What is the GCF of 2, 6, and 10? 2. The highest number that multiplies into them is a 2, so I take out a 2. And then we have to go through my variables and figure out what variables are part of the GCF too. I look at my x's. Do they all at least have an x? What is the lowest exponent on the x? 3. So I'm going to take out GCF of x to the third. If I look at my y, they all at least have a y. Lowest exponent, y to the second. That is my GCF. It goes out front. I am factoring, so I'm writing it as multiplication. Something 2x cubed y squared times something. Okay, now we're going to kind of think like reverse distributing and see what I have left. 2 times what gives me 2? 1. X cubed times what gives me x cubed? If I put an x there, what would I get back? X to the 4th. So I don't put any x there. Y squared times what will give me y to the 8th? Y to the... Nope. I'm multiplying, so what do I do with the exponents? 6. Because when you distribute, you multiply, so you add your exponents. So 2 plus what gives me 8? Y to the 6th. Okay? If that distributing confuses you, you can always kind of look at it and think about, okay, what will I get if I take it out? So this is another way to think about it. 2 times what gives me 6? 3. And then if you want to think about it, I started with x to the 4th. I took out x to the 3rd, so I'm going to have x to the what left? First. So if you want to think about subtracting it, either way is fine. It doesn't really matter. I started with y to the squared. I took out y to the squared. Do I have any y's left? No. And then my last term. You should have 3 terms in here. If there's 3 terms you started with, you should have 3 terms in your parentheses. 2 times what gives me positive 10? Positive 5. And then go through your exponents. If I started with x to the 5th, I took out x to the 3rd, so I'm going to have x to the what left? 2nd. If it's easier for you to think about it that way, about what you have left, that's fine. I started with y to the 10th. Sean, keep your head up, please. I started with y to the 10th. I took out y to the 2nd, so I'm going to have y to the what left? 8. Now, you can always, like I said, distribute to make sure it is correct. If you go through and distribute it, you can always check. That's why I forgot that she said she had him. He said he didn't have it, and I forgot that you had it. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, go ahead and try the next one. Try B on your own real quick. Same idea. We are factoring out using the GCF. Just a second. No, we're factoring.
By grouping.
GCF, and then we'll do grouping. Yeah, you don't really need the plus 1a squared, but maybe the plus 1. Yeah, you don't really need the 1 there, but other than that, you're good. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily count off, but it's, you don't really see it written. Same thing, you don't really need the 1 there, but I wouldn't count off necessarily. Yes. Okay, what's the GCF? Find the GCF first of those 3. 3. No. 3, 6, 3, and 24. So what is the biggest number that goes into 3, 6, and 24? So what is the biggest number that multiplies into 3, 6, and 24? 3. So put a 3 up front. And then look at your variable. Do they all share an A? And what's the lowest exponent? They have a to the... No. The lowest exponent they share in the a's. A to the... What's the lowest exponent they share in their b? Okay, put your parentheses. Then go through each one and see what you have left. So 3 times 1 gives you 6. And then look at your exponent. That's the right GCF. And then you go through and you see what's left. 3 times 1 gives you 6. I started with a to the 10th. I took out a to the 5th. So I'm going to have a to the 5th. And then I started with b to the 8th. I took out b to the 4th. And then you do that for each term.
When you do the, this one right here, do you need to put that B?
No, because you took it out. So there's nothing left. Because if you put a B in it, it would be b to the 5th. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question?
And then look at your, I had started with a to the 10th. I took out a to the 5th. So I'm going to have a to the what left? Yes. So you go through your exponent and see what you took out and see what's going to be left. Yes. Any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and look at this. From what I'm seeing, you guys are doing pretty well. It's just something you kind of have to get used to. I think math-wise you can do it. It's just you kind of have to get used to it. So let's kind of work through this together. What was the GCF, Hunter? Yep, 3a to the 5th, b to the 4th. That was the GCF. The GCF of all 3 terms goes out front. Then I look at put my parentheses, because that's what factor means. Write it as multiplication. 3a to the 5th, b to the 4th times what will give me back to what the polynomial they gave me. So the first term is going to be what? Dylan, what was the first term?
2a to the 5th, b to the 4th.
2a to the 5th, b to the 4th. 3 times 2 gives me 6. And then when you look at your exponents, you just say, okay, I started with a to the 10th. I took out a to the 5th, so I have a to the 5th left. I started with b to the 8th. I took out b to the 4th. I have b to the 4th left. Or you can think about distributing it and adding your exponent, whichever is easiest for you. The next term, the middle term. What did you have on the middle term? Lydia, what do you have on the middle term? Middle term. Just the middle one. Do what? What do you have, Lydia?
A squared.
A squared. Yeah, you're good. A squared. 3 times what gives me 3? 1. I started with a to the 7th. I took out a to the 5th. That's a to the 2nd. I started with b to the 4th. I took out b to the 4th, so there's no b's left. Now the last term. What do you have for the last term? Someone who hasn't answered one yet. Destiny.
Negative AB squared.
Negative a b squared. No, sorry. Negative 8b squared. So 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. I took out a to the 5th, so there's no more a's left. I took out b to the 4th, so it's b squared. So you want to go through and think about, I took out this, what do I have left?
Does it matter what order we write in?
You want to keep them in the same order. That's the terms up here.
Well, that's got it.
Okay, well, just keep them in the same order. That's the easiest way to look at it. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, factoring by grouping. This is the second way of factoring we're going to talk about. This you're going to use if, it says it in number 1. Use factor by grouping if there are 4 terms or more. Now, usually, you're not going to have more than 4 terms. In this class, you won't have more than 4 terms. Algebra 2, pre-calc, you might have more than 4. This class, you won't. So if you have 4 terms, your first thought should be, can I use factoring by grouping? Okay? So here are the steps for factoring by grouping. Factor the GCF out of the first 2 terms. Factor the GCF out of the second 2 terms. And that's exactly like we've been doing. So all you're doing is factoring the GCF out twice. Number 3, the parentheses should be the same. This is how to check if you're doing factoring by grouping correctly. The parentheses after I factor out the GCF of the first 2 and the second 2 have to be the same. The parentheses should be the same. Okay, next thing we're going to do is factor out the part in parentheses. The stuff not in the parentheses goes in their own parentheses. Lots of parentheses happening. So I take out the parenthesis part. What's not in parentheses goes in their own parenthesis. It sounds like a lot, but I think you guys can do this. Once we go through a couple, I think you'll catch on to it. I promise. Okay? So I'm just writing it down so you can go back when you look at the homework and you can see, kind of read through what to do. We're only doing these 5. We're not going to do example 4, so we only have a couple more left. Okay, so let's look at A. So if I look at A, just by looking at it, what tells you factoring by grouping? 4 terms. 4 terms, you should automatically think factoring by grouping. What you want to check for first, is there a GCF that I can factor out of all 4 of these terms? So if I look at all 4 of these terms, always look for a GCF first. Besides 1, do all 4 of these terms have anything in common? No, they all don't have an R, they all don't have an N, they all don't have a 5. So there's nothing I can factor out of all 4 of them. Check for the GCF first. So now I'm going to try factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping. There's 4 terms. Step 2, factor the GCF out of the first 2. So you look at your first 2 terms. Rn plus 5n. What is the GCF of Rn and 5n? N. That's it. They don't share a 5 because my coefficients are 1 and 5, so I don't share a coefficient GCF. They don't share an R. All they share is an N. So we're going to factor out an N out of the first 2, just like we did with the examples we did earlier. Now I go through. N times what gives me Rn? R. N times what gives me 5n? 5. So I have r plus 5 in the parentheses. So you take the GCF out of the first two, exactly like we did earlier. Any questions so far? Then I look at my second two. So negative r minus 5. Those are my second two terms. Now I want to take the GCF out of those two terms. Now, I want my parentheses to be the same. So I'm thinking to myself, what can I take out of negative r minus 5 to possibly get back an r plus 5? So what is the GCF of negative r minus 5? Doesn't really have one necessarily, but what can I take out that will give me an r plus 5? Negative what? Negative what? 1. If I take out a negative 1, negative 1 times what will give me negative r? R. Negative 1 times what will give me negative 5? Positive 5. So sometimes it's not necessarily a GCF, but you need to look at, say, what can I take out of those two that will give me the same parentheses? That's the goal for factor by grouping. Now I want to factor. So, is this factored? Is it only written as multiplication? No. Why? What part that tells you that this is not all the way factored? The negative in the middle. That's a minus. So I'm subtracting stuff. Factoring has to be written as multiplication. So the last step, if your parenthesis is the same, what you need to do, this is step number 4. You're going to take out your parenthesis part. So r plus 5, basically you're factoring it out, which is kind of confusing to think about. All you need to think about is I'm taking out an r plus 5. So r plus 5 is one parenthesis. Whatever is not in the parenthesis goes in their own parenthesis. So as I look up here, what two things are not in a parenthesis? N and negative 1. So n minus 1 goes in their own parenthesis. So r, whatever in your parenthesis goes in one. Whatever is not in the parenthesis goes in the other one. Now, why is this factored? It is multiplying. R plus 5 times n minus 1. I am multiplying. Binomial times binomial. Parenthesis times parenthesis. So this is your factored form. Okay? Any questions? Guys, pay attention, please. Ladies.
On this part,
Yes.
I don't know, it might be beneficial if you just show them what that means, that if you go ahead, they don't have to really do it on their paper, but if
Right.
you,
Foil it out.
yeah, and show them why,
Right.
what it
So,
means.
so like I said earlier, we're basically working backwards. So this, my answer I get right here, is what you were given on your test yesterday. So you were said multiply this out. So if you multiply out, you would FOIL. R times n is Rn. R times negative 1. Negative R. Now take your 5 and distribute it. 5 times n. Yeah, 5 times negative 1. Negative 5. So what, like I said earlier, you're basically working backwards. This is your answer. It's in a different order, but it's the same exact thing. So what we're doing is working backwards. You don't necessarily have to do this step, but that's just showing you that you can always check it by foiling it, distributing it, and you will always get back the original. So I'm working backwards. This is the answer you would have gotten yesterday, and you would have been given this. Now you're given the polynomial, and I want to write it as factored. So we're working backwards is what we're doing. Okay? Let's look at B real quick. First thing I noticed, there are 4 terms. You always want to look for a GCF. Is there a GCF for all 4 of these terms? So 3np, 15p, negative 4n, and negative 20. Is there a GCF for all 4 of them? No. 3, 15, 4, and 20 don't share a factor, and none of them have the same variables. There's 4 terms, so we're going to factor by grouping. So we're going to look at my first 2 first, take out the GCF, and then look at my second 2 and take out the GCF, and hopefully my parentheses match. So as I look at my first 2, 3np plus 15p. What is the GCF for 3np and 15p? 3. What? Look at 3NP and 15P. What is the GCF of 3NP and 15P? 3P. So as I look at this, we are going to take out, my GCF is a 3P. So I'm going to take out a 3P. So you take out the GCF of your first two. Now let's see what's left. 3P times what gives me 3NP? N. Basically, I started with 3NP, I took out a 3P, so I have an N left. 3P times what will give me back a 15P? 5. So positive 5. N plus 5. So you take the GCF out of the first two, just like we did. Now I look at my second two, negative 4N minus 20. My goal is to get my parentheses to be the same if I'm doing it correctly. What is the GCF of negative 4N and negative 20? What was that? No, not negative 1. Negative 4. Is N part of the GCF? No, because 20 doesn't have an N. So my GCF is just negative 4. So I take out a negative 4. Now let's go through and see what's left. Negative 4 times what gives me negative 4N? N. Negative 4 times what will give me negative 20? Positive 5. So it's just taking out the GCF twice. And then finally, if your parentheses are the same, your N plus 5, whatever's in parentheses goes in one parenthesis. So N plus 5 goes in one. What goes in my other one? Yep, which is 3P minus 4. And this is now factored because I have something times something. N plus 5 times 3P minus 4. That is factored. That's what definition of factored is. Okay, let's go ahead and try one more, and then I'm going to have you try two on your own. Let's look at E. Let's look at E real quick. Okay, so let's look at E. So if I look at E, we have 15A minus 3B. So 15A minus 3B. First of all, before I do factor by grouping, I always forget to do this. Look at all four terms. Is there a GCF for all four of these terms I can take out right at the beginning? No. 15, 3, 4, 20. None of them have an in common. So let's look at the first two. I see four terms, so I'm going to factor by grouping. 15A minus 3B. So what is the GCF of 15A and a negative 3AB? 3A. Now I go through. 3A times what gives me 15A? 5. Do I need an A? No, because if I put an A there, what would I get back? A squared. So it's just a 5. So 3A times 5 gives me 15A. 3A times what gives me negative 3AB? More specific. Negative B. So you need a negative. You're good. Just be careful with the negatives because they'll screw you up. So negative B. Next thing, I look at my next two terms. If I look at my next two terms, what is the GCF of 4B minus 20? 4. So I put positive 4. Make sure you put a positive there. It is a positive 4. So plus 4. If I look at my parentheses, 4 times what gives me 4B? B. 4 times what gives me negative 20? Negative 5. Now let's look. Let's think about it. So I get it out, and I told you earlier, you need to have the same parentheses. Do I have the same parentheses?
Yes, they're just in different order.
Are they the same though?
Yes.
Just because they're in different order, are they the same?
Yes.
Think about it. Does the order matter when I subtract? Is 6 minus 3 the same as 3 minus 6? What is 6 minus 3? 3. What is 3 minus 6? Negative 3. So the order matters. This is a positive 5 over here. So look, this is important. This one's tricky. This is a positive 5 here. This is a what? negative 5. The order doesn't matter if the signs are the same. Positive 5, negative 5. Negative B, positive B. So how can I correct this to make this a negative B and a positive 5? Okay, so multiplying by a negative 1 switches the sign. Good, that's what we kind of talked about last chapter. But I can't really, instead of multiplying by a negative 1, divide by negative 1. But what would that really look like here? You're on the right track. What he's saying, Sean has the right idea. I want to somehow divide by a negative 1 or multiply by a negative 1. So how do I show it in this second part that I want to multiply by a negative 1? Where would I put that negative 1 at? How else do I know with this? This is multiplying by a 4. So instead of multiplying by a positive 4, what can I multiply by that will switch the signs here? Negative 4. So if I switch that to a negative 4, yeah, but I didn't hear it with the 4, so that's why. Maybe you did, sorry. Make that a negative 4. So that's an issue you're probably going to run into as you do the homework. If you run into it and you notice the parentheses aren't the same, but they're really close, just a sign difference, take out a different sign. So negative 4 times what gives me a positive 4b? Negative b. So negative 4 times a negative b gives me a positive 4b. Negative 4 times what gives me a negative 20? Positive 5. Now, the order is still different, but are the signs in front the same? Yes. Negative b, positive 5, positive 5. So the order is different, but the signs are the same in front. So now, to write my final answer, what's my final factored form going to look like? 5 minus b. It doesn't matter if you put negative b plus 5 or 5 minus b. So what's in parentheses goes in 1. What goes in my other one? 3a minus 4. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So if we don't do these two in class, are you going to work on the homework? Because you're going to have a good chunk of time for homework. So what I'm worried about is the last 10 minutes you're going to get annoyed with doing homework and you're going to quit and you're going to start talking. Are we going to do that?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, you have a good chunk of time. I will. Be about a half hour. So do not quit early or else I will take notes longer next time. I'm doing this because I think you can handle a little extra time for homework. Okay, so, no. So homework, let me write it up here. Homework is page 498, 15 through 38, 45, and then I want you to do 18, 26, and 32 now. Those are the three I want you to do now. So your homework is 498, 15 through 38, 45, and I want you to do 18, 26, and 32 now. Those are the first three you need to do, and you need to get it initialed off.